Okay, Philippians 1, we are continuing our series. Did everyone receive a note sheet? Did you receive a note sheet? If you did not, I'm not sure who has them. Does everybody have a note sheet? Raise your hand if you don't. Okay, if you're good. All right. And by the way, just so you know, I'm using a cane this morning for the first time. I have no idea what happened. Friday night, my right foot just started hurting like crazy all through the night. And yesterday, and I don't know what in the world I did, but I want to dispel an ugly rumor right now. I did not kick Hopi. I didn't do that. That's not what happened. So get that evil thought out of your mind. And but anyway, but the pain medication is better, is working now. So I'm going to try to stand instead of sit. All right, here we are. Philippians. We are continuing our series through Philippians, and we're starting this morning at Philippians 1 and verse 9, where Paul said, "And this I pray, and this I pray." Remember last time from verse 4, Paul mentioned the fact he's been praying for these Christians at Philippi. Philippi is in Greece. And then starting at verse 9 and going through verse 11, he mentions in more specific language just what he had been praying about. Paul tells us what the actual content of that prayer was. It's interesting that the content of that prayer for these Philippian Christians was an emphasis on the spiritual and not so much on the physical. And most often, that is not the emphasis in our prayers. We tend to focus on health problems and financial and employment needs and other tangible things, and that's okay. Remember in the middle of the disciples' prayer from Matthew 6, often called the Lord's Prayer. That's a misnomer. The Lord's Prayer is in chapter 17, where Jesus prayed as he was going to the garden to be arrested. But in Matthew 6:11, Jesus said, we are to ask God to give us this day our daily bread. Our daily bread means our ongoing material needs. So we are to ask God for things. But in our praying, we sometimes minimize the spiritual component, but Paul didn't. Paul connected his prayer to some serious spiritual needs. I believe this section can be extremely helpful because how often have we said to someone, I'm praying for you, or I'm going to pray for you? The question is, just what does it mean to pray for someone? What are we supposed to pray about? First, an example of what not to pray about. There is a pastor in Los Angeles named Dr. Robert Heimers. He is a former Southern Baptist. In the mid-'80s, I accidentally sat right next to him at a pastor's luncheon, and we shared a superficial conversation together. At that time, I had no idea he was a hyper-fundamentalist type who not long after that received nationwide media attention because he advocating praying for the death of then Supreme Court Justice William Brennan. Justice Brennan was at that time the influential head of the liberal faction of the Supreme Court. And Dr. Heimers protested Brennan's pro-abortion position. And protesting abortion is fine, but he didn't stop there. He instructed his congregation in downtown Los Angeles to pray that God would remove Justice Brennan from the Supreme Court. How? Through his death. He advocated praying that God would execute Justice Brennan. The Los Angeles Times called Heimers the, quote, death-praying pastor. It seems Pastor Heimers wanted to exercise what is called imprecatory praying. That might not be a familiar word. Imprecatory praying. To imprecate means to invoke evil upon or to curse someone's enemies. It's interesting that the Psalms themselves contain numerous imprecatory chapters and verses. In the New Testament, Jesus himself quoted some of those imprecatory prayers. Paul also quoted an imprecatory prayer. But Dr. Heimers misunderstood imprecatory praying. We said last time, Jesus said we are to pray for our enemies. we are to pray for those that oppose us. But praying for them to drop dead was probably not what Jesus meant. Dr. Heimers ultimately realized his mistake and apologized not long after that, but the public relations damage had been done. But that's not something we should pray for. Heimers should have encouraged his congregation to pray that for Brennan's salvation and pray that God would change the justice's mind on that controversial matter, but not pray that God would strike him dead. So what did Paul mean? And this I pray. How are we to pray for people? There are 4 specific areas cited here that describe how Paul had been praying for his Christian friends at Philippi. So don't miss them. 1, Paul prayed for them to have a knowledgeable and discerning form of love. Paul prayed for them to have a knowledgeable and discerning form of love. This means he wanted them to have a love that is discriminating in the good sense of that word. Verse 9, and this I pray, that your love may abound still more and more. How? In knowledge and all discernment. This is interesting. The ancient Philippi congregation did already exercise love toward one another, but Paul wanted this love to be abounding. And the word abound means to superabound, to increase to an excess. Paul wanted these Philippians to actually overdo this love thing, to love one another on steroids. And especially he wanted them to overdo love in 2 specific areas. Notice, Paul wanted the knowledge and discernment components to love. He wanted those components to abound more and more and more. Love is to be knowledgeable and discerning. Love is not to be an uncontrollable emotion. Love is not an unregulated impulse, but love is to act in intelligence and discernment. And discernment is the Greek word athesis, and we get the word aesthetic from that Greek word. It means insight and perception. The reason these words, knowledge and discernment, are mentioned together is because, and don't miss this, because discernment is the practical application of knowledge. You might jot that down. Discernment is the practical application of knowledge. Now, most people have heard it said, quote, love is blind. That is absolute foolishness. Infatuation is most often blind, but not true love. Biblical love knows and understands what is right and what is wrong. Biblical love understands what is false and what is true. Biblical love is knowledgeable enough to make the right application at the right time. Read this statement again. Paul said, I pray that your love may abound still more and more. And how shall that love abound? In knowledge and all discernment. Paul is emphasizing that our love should abound more and more in knowledge and discernment. Paraphrasing this, Paul said, I am praying that God helps you to be more and more knowledgeable and more discerning in this ever-increasing love that you are manifesting to one another. Now, if we reduced the church to its irreducible minimum, then the 2 most basic and essential elements in the church are truth and love. Truth and love. Truth is related to knowledge because truth is knowledge that is true. So truth and love. And both elements need to be maintained in balance. Paul mentioned both in Ephesians 4, verse 15, because he said there we are to be, quote, speaking the truth. How are we to speak the truth? In love. So it's truth and love. The problem is there is a not so subtle movement in evangelicalism to promote a non-discerning form of love. A love that doesn't discriminate between truth and error. A love that doesn't differentiate between righteousness and sin. One famous theologian, Dr. William Hendrickson, commented on this increasing trend. He said, a person that possesses love but lacks discernment might reveal a great deal of eagerness and enthusiasm. He might donate to all kinds of causes. His motives might be worthwhile and his intentions honorable, but but he might be doing more harm than good because he isn't discerning. There's an excellent book called Reckless Faith, subtitled When the Church Loses Its Will to Discern. And it has. One example of this gross non-discernment is found in different biblical translations themselves. This proliferation of what are called inclusive language translations of the Bible are a problem. Inclusive language translations are more evidence of this increasing trend among mainline denominations and some evangelicals to be less than discerning. One specific example of an inclusive Bible is the translation called, listen to this, Good as New, a radical retelling of the Scriptures. Well, the name itself gives it away. A radical retelling of the Scriptures. $25.71 in hardback, available at Amazon.com, and don't waste your money. The translation coordinator was John Henson, a retired Baptist minister, and as I've said before, some Baptists are an embarrassment. It uses what its introduction calls a cultural translation. Not only is it inclusive in relation to gender, meaning male and female, but it translates ancient words into a supposed modern day equivalence. For example, demon possession becomes mental illness, meaning demon possession isn't mentioned. Instead, demon possession is called mental illness. Now, understand something. Demon possession can cause mental illness because someone that is possessed doesn't at all times have control of his mental faculties. But translating biblical accounts of demon possession as mental illness discounts the fact demons do exist, and demons can actually possess people and cause them to manifest strange and bizarre and uncontrollable behavior. This translation even changes names. Example, Peter and Nicodemus become Rocky and Ray. Now, Rocky I get. Peter is translated from the Greek word Petros. Petros means rock. So you can call Peter Rocky if you wish. But Ray from Nicodemus? Why don't you just call him Nick? I don't get that. Bethesda is changed to Fishtown. The word salvation is changed to completeness because religious terminology such as salvation is eliminated from this translation because it is said not to be appropriate to our modern culture. Now, let me cite an example of how serious this can be. One example of that is in the second half of 1 Corinthians 7, verse 9. In an accurate and reliable translation, such as the newer edition of the King James translation, it reads this: "For it is better to marry than to burn with passion." Paraphrased as, it's better to be married so that someone's sexual needs can be met in marriage than to remain single and celibate and endure constant unfulfilled sexual desires. Now, there are other reasons to be married, for sure, but that is a legitimate one. But this all-inclusive Bible reads this: if you know you have strong needs, meaning sexual needs, get yourself a partner. Better than being frustrated. Notice that no mention is made of marriage. No mention is made of marriage in that reading. If you know you have strong needs, get yourself a partner. Better than being frustrated. The instructions from that translation read that if we have strong sexual urges, then just grab someone and be intimate, because sexual frustration is not a healthy thing. So that reading from that translation encourages and promotes promiscuous fornication and body counts. And that is God's word that the editor twisted. This Bible admits all of the pastoral epistles, meaning you won't find 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. And then it omits the entire book of Revelation. It's not there either. Instead, it does what the Da Vinci Code does and includes the false Gnostic gospel of Thomas. Thomas is proven to be a forgery. Now, that's common knowledge, but this translation includes the Gospel of Thomas. This Bible has the endorsement of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the principal leader of the Church of England. He is the ceremonial head of the global Anglican Communion, consisting of some 85 plus million members. The Archbishop actually wrote the foreword to this Bible because the Archbishop doesn't have discernment. Church of England, I might add, is an apostate church. But sales haven't been so good. Last time I checked, Amazon.com lists this radical revisionist translation as number 1,067,787th on its best-selling list, which is great, I think. Anyway, but one more example. The most recent unfortunate option is called the Passion Translation. Some of us have heard of that. The name itself is a misnomer because it isn't a legitimate translation, and it isn't an actual paraphrase. It's one man's rewrite of the Bible. The Passion Translation is a reimagining of the Bible as one biased human being thinks how it should read. Brian Simmons, who is the author of this, considers himself to be an apostle. He's not. Apostles no longer exist in the original sense of the word. He is, though, a part of the New Apostolic Reformation movement, which is a false movement. And his rewrite of the Bible is from that perspective. Now, Bill Johnson from Bethel Church and other New Apostolic Reformation personalities promote and actually teach from that translation. Bill Johnson made this statement: this translation, this Passion Translation, is one of the greatest things to happen with Bible translations in my lifetime. That is a foolish, foolish statement. Never trust a Bible translation that is, quote, been translated from a single person. Never. Do you realize the original King James translation from 1604 to 1611? There were 56 men, linguists, scholars that were assigned to that translation. Those men met at 6 different locations, 6 different committees, given certain sections of the scriptures to translate, and then what they translated was passed on to the other committees, translation committees, to check their work. Never trust a translation from a single person. No reputable theologians recommends the Passion Translation. I consult the website, BibleGate.com. It's an excellent website, BibleGateway.com. I consult it often because I like to read from other translations. It offers 90 different English translations, and the Passion Translation is not one of them. Old Testament scholar and NIV Translation Committee member, NIV New International Version, Dr. Andrew Shedd, said this about the Passion Translation. He said this in a recent international evangelical peer-reviewed theological journal, meaning a respected academic publication. Listen, Brian Simmons has made a new translation which aims to reintroduce the passion and fire of the Bible to the English reader. He achieves this by abandoning all interest in textual accuracy, by playing fast and loose with the original languages, and by inserting so much new material into the biblical text that it is at least 50% longer than the original. The result is a strongly sectarian translation that no longer counts Scripture by masquerading as a Bible. It threatens to bind entire churches in slavery to a false God. Simmons claims that Jesus visited him personally, took him to the library of heaven. Didn't know they had a library in heaven. Asked him to write down the translation. He claims to have received downloads and secrets of the Hebrew language from Jesus himself. Simmons even admitted that he has minimal background in biblical languages. If all of that isn't troubling enough, in a television interview, he claimed that Jesus promised to bring him back to heaven and give him a new chapter to be added to the Gospel of John, John chapter 22. This is just a small sampling of what is going on out there. The problem is some evangelicals are starting to embrace a form of love that is more and more tolerant of serious error. It is now permissible to accept non-truth. But that is a fraudulent form of love, because 1 Corinthians 13:6, that itemizes 15 characteristics of a love, states that agape love, true love, quote, rejoices in the truth. This means actual love from God rejoices in truth, rejoices in sound doctrine, and agape love also gets upset and angered at false doctrine and error. Understand, Paul sensed that a permissive love that was ignorant, a love that didn't discern, a love that didn't discriminate, might have been present at Philippi. And that's the reason he said, "Dear God, please give those people there a knowledgeable, fully informed, and a discerning form of love." People, things haven't changed much since then. In my sincere opinion, the modern church's greatest need is discernment. Discernment. Number 2, Paul prayed for them to have a commitment to excellence. A commitment to excellence. We pastored in the Bay Area for some time, and I had occasion to go to a game at the Oakland Coliseum. That's where the Raiders, who are now in Las Vegas, played. And now deceased former owner and football executive Al Davis of the Raiders created the famous Oakland Raiders motto, commitment to excellence. I mean, it was plastered all over the stadium. Commitment to excellence. It's unfortunate that Raiders teams in recent times have not maintained that commitment to excellence. 4-13 this past season is not a commitment to excellence, but it's still a good motto. Christians, more than any other people group alive, should have a commitment to excellence. Notice verse 10. That you may approve the things that are excellent. This word approve was an important word in the original Greek language. That word was used in classical Greek culture to evaluate metal to determine its properties. That word was used to evaluate money to be sure it wasn't counterfeit. That word was used to evaluate the quality of certain animals. It was even used to assess the state of the weather. So this word translated as approve means to test, to prove, to evaluate, and determine verification of something. This statement Paul prayed that the congregation at Philippi would be able to approve and evaluate and determine the things that were excellent. Paul wanted his friends to be able to determine what is most important, to determine differences and decide what mattered most. It's being able to distinguish between what is good and what is better, and differentiate between what is better and that which is best and excellent. Being able to do that separates the simple from the profound, separates the weak from the strong, and separates the common from the extraordinary. Paul told these Philippi Christians not to settle for anything less than that which is excellent. The word excellent in the original language means to supersede, to surpass, to be better than, to be of more value than, and to excel in. To excel in. That's the essence of this word, excellence. Notice the definition. This is an important definition. Don't miss it. Excellence on an individual basis is doing what needs to be done, doing it when it needs to be done, doing it the best it should be done, and doing it that way every time we do it. That is excellence. Now let me read that one more time and comment on a part of it. Excellence is doing what needs to be done, doing it when it needs to be done, doing it the best it should be done. Now notice, not the best it could be done, because sometimes something is insignificant and minor and doesn't matter that much. So we don't need to spend time and energy on doing something that the best it could be done when should be done constitutes excellence. doing what needs to be done, doing it the best it should be done, and doing it that way every time we do it. Hyman G. Rickover retired as a four-star admiral in the U.S. Navy. And altogether, this is amazing. This man served under 13 presidents, from Woodrow Wilson to Ronald Reagan. He was active in the Navy 63 years, longer than anyone else in naval history. He only retired then because he was forced to. Rickover directed the original development of naval nuclear propulsion and directed its operations for more than 3 decades. And he is known as the father of the nuclear navy. He has been described as hyperactive, political, blunt, confrontational, insulting, flamboyant, and unexcelled workaholic. He was always demanding of others without regard to rank or position, as well as demanding of himself. It was said he was a thunderous force of nature, and he had little tolerance of mediocrity. In short, he was committed to excellence. This is evident in how he interviewed different men who were being promoted to certain strategic positions. One reason was because he wanted to cut through the standard, expected, rehearsed textbook answers and get at the person underneath. He especially wanted to know how the candidate would act and react under stress. Listen to this. He sometimes would have someone sit across from him in a chair that had the front legs cut 2 inches shorter than the back legs, just to keep the candidate off balance. Former President Carter, who died this past December at age 100, described his interview with the famous admiral. Rickover questioned him about where he stood in his class at the Naval Academy. Carter said he was proud to announce he had graduated 59th in a class of 820, meaning President Carter graduated in the top 7% of his class, graduating class from the U.S. Naval Academy. And then Carter sat back and waited to hear congratulations. But congratulations never came. Instead, Rickover leaned forward and said to him, "Did you do your best?" Carter started to respond, yes, but then he remembered who he was responding to, so he thought he should probably be more realistic and honest, and so he said, "No, sir, I have to admit I didn't always do my best." Rickover thought for a long time and then asked one final question that Carter said he couldn't answer, and a question he said he never, ever forgot. And that question was, and why not? Why not? You didn't do your best. Why not? One prayer I have been praying is that God would help me to have a commitment to excellence, to do my best, to help me be the best person I can be, to be the best person God has called me to be, to help me be the best man I can be, to be the best Christian I can be, to be the best husband I can be, to be the best father and grandfather I can be, to be the best pastor and teacher I can be, to be the best personal evangelist I can be. All we can do, people, is all we can do. And that's all God expects from us. But that's excellence. One of the ambitions God has for me and God has for this congregation as a whole is that we would have a serious, ongoing commitment to excellence. Number 3, third prayer request. Paul prayed for them to have a sense of authenticity. Verse 10, and that you may be sincere and without offense until the day of Christ. Now remember from verse 6 last time, we said that this day of Christ is a prophetical reference to Jesus' return. Jesus in heaven, he promised to return. This is a reference to his return, and in particular to the first phase of Christ's return, called the rapture. Paul said that until Jesus returns at the rapture phase to rescue us from off the earth. His prayer for these people in ancient Philippi was for them to be authentic. The dictionary would define something as being authentic when it conforms with what it claims to be. If something is authentic, it conforms to what it claims to be. Inauthentic means that we claim to be one thing and then turn around and turn out to be something else. Most people call someone that is inauthentic as he or she is hypocritical. There are blogs, newsletters, podcasts, and websites that chronicle blatant examples of hypocrisy, inauthenticity in modern evangelicalism. It has become a pandemic problem. I could cite examples for hours. It is that severe. Some people incorrectly feel that someone becomes more credible as a Christian if he has a Christian fish symbol on his bumper sticker or on his business card. But a spiritual advertisement is not a guarantee that someone is an authentic Christian. In fact, one Christian contractor actually told me he tries not to do business with professing Christians because he has been burned so often. Please notice Paul uses the word sincere. And he prayed that these people at Philippi would be sincere. And in doing that, he was asking God to help them be authentic. This is interesting. The English word sincere originated from two Latin words. And those two words meant without wax. Without wax. What was that a reference to? The word sincere was used in ancient societies as a reference to pottery. Pottery. Sometimes pottery had been baked in an oven, and during the baking process, it would develop small cracks. And after the piece of pottery had been taken out of the oven, the potter would notice that there were these small, tiny cracks in that piece. It is said that a dishonest potter wouldn't want to throw out his pottery because it had cracks, because that would have meant he had wasted material and time and he would lose a potential sale. He wanted to salvage that piece even though it was imperfect and had cracks. He wanted to hide the pottery's imperfections, so he rubbed beeswax into those cracks and then allowed the wax to harden. And then after the wax had hardened, he would smooth out that area and he would paint over the cracks in order to conceal them. He tried to make that cracked piece of pottery seem like just another normal piece of pottery. So he put it out in his booth at the marketplace, and then the unsuspecting customer would purchase that piece of pottery, would bring home that piece of reworked pottery, and if he set it out in the open in the afternoon, the hot sun would then melt away the wax and expose the cracks, and it would be another consumer ripoff. But an honest potter would throw away a cracked and defective piece of pottery. He would discard it. He wouldn't rub beeswax into the cracks and attempt to deceive the prospective customer. He would only sell the good stuff. If a potter was an honest businessman, he would go to the marketplace, set up all his products, and he would advertise his pottery as, quote, sincere pottery. That designation, sincere, meant that his pottery didn't contain wax. Nothing was covered up. There weren't concealed cracks. It wasn't a defective piece. What someone would see on the market shelf was exactly what he would get. So to label someone or something as sincere meant it was the genuine article. Paul wanted his friends at this congregation in Philippi to be sincere. He wanted them to keep it real, to be authentic. Romans 12, verse 9. Some interesting instructions. Let love be without hypocrisy, meaning let love be sincere, without wax, authentic. And then Paul continues, abhor, meaning hate what is evil, cling, meaning hold on tight to what is good. I heard about a small community that had a gigantic oak in the middle of its town square. The tree was said to be the pride of the townspeople, this massive oak tree. It had been there long, long before most of them had been born, and it would probably remain there, or so it seemed, long after all of them would die. One afternoon, though, there was a horrendous storm going through the area, and those fierce winds from the storm cracked that oak tree literally in half. In doing that, it exposed a tree trunk that was just full of disease. It was literally rotten and eaten away from disease. This oak tree had stood for decades as a symbol of strength on the outside, but on the inside it was weak and vulnerable. And that's the reason it ultimately fell. And I'm curious this morning if that oak tree is an analogous of the 21st century church in this nation. For instance, in the United States, every 48 hours, this is amazing, every 48 hours another congregation becomes a megachurch. A megachurch is a congregation averaging more than 2,000 in attendance each weekend. In fact, churches are now becoming so large, a church has to average more than 25,000 just to be in the top 10 largest congregations of this nation. I'm going to read you something. These are all professing evangelical churches, and most of these congregations have multiple campuses, meaning there's a parent campus, which is the largest, and there's a number of satellite campuses. And so all these numbers represent the total average number of combined attendees at all locations. But still, these numbers are crazy. Largest church in America, Ray Grichelle, pastors Life Church, Oklahoma City. Average attendance, hang on, 76,000. To put that number, 76,000, in perspective, the average per game attendance during this past NFL season was 69,520. So Life Church attracts more people to their services than does the average NFL franchise. Number 2, Church of the Highlands, Birmingham, Alabama, 60,000. 60,000. It must be interesting attending church with 59,999 of your closest friends. That has to be unique. Number 3, Christ Church of the Valley, Phoenix, 48,496. Number 4, Lakewood Church, Houston, 45,000. Joel Osteen is the pastor, my favorite pastor. Okay, that was a joke. Number 5, North Point Church, Atlanta, 43,830. In addition, there are congregations that are building $80 and $90 million facilities. In 2013, and we've been there, First Baptist Church Dallas finished a $135 million 5-acre church campus renovation. I might add, First Baptist Church Dallas owns 6 downtown city blocks. Only God knows what that value is. Some congregations have annual incomes that are larger than some U.S. corporations. From the external perspective of average members, actual members, and average attendance, and these numbers and buildings and budgets, the church has never been larger. The church has never been stronger from a statistical perspective. But that's on the outside. The more important question is, and what is the church like on the inside? Is bigger necessarily better? Is its membership sincere? Is its Christianity authentic? Are its families committed to reproducing biblical qualities in the next generations? Do its men have a serious commitment to biblical manhood? Do its marriages have mates that are fully devoted to one another until the end? Do its people have a substantial spiritual appetite? Do its congregations have a heart for God and an obvious concern for other people? Do its emerging generations stand against negative peer pressure and determined to be different from the norm? Are its people theologically equipped and knowledgeable enough to be able to defend themselves against a secular worldview, false religions, and non-Christian cults? Do its constituents care about people far from God enough to move heaven and earth to present them the gospel? Are its people people one thing sitting in church on Sunday morning and then something else altogether different on Monday morning. The question that begs to be answered is the contemporary church of Jesus Christ in North America, is the church sincere or is it full of wax? Paul asked God to help his friends at Philippi to be sincere and authentic and real, and notice, without offense. Being without offense means not being offensive. And that is a direct extension of being sincere and authentic, because people are offended if we are something other than what we profess to be. I find this interesting. People might tolerate hypocrisy in themselves, but most people have zero tolerance for hypocrisy in someone else. Isn't that interesting? We tolerate hypocrisy in ourselves, and then we have zero tolerance for hypocrisy in someone else. That attitude in and of itself is hypocritical. And number 4, Paul prayed for them to be practitioners of righteousness. Practitioners of righteousness. Verse 11, being filled with the fruits of righteousness. Fruits of righteousness means evidence of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. Now please notice that it is Jesus Christ and not ourselves that is the source of someone's righteousness. It is said that British Army officer and diplomat Lawrence of Arabia, famous for his activities during World War I, he died in 1935, he once brought some Arabs to London and put them up in an expensive hotel. Now, those men were Bedouins, and had only resided in tents prior to that time. These men had never been in a hotel. And so these men were totally blown away at this incredible hotel. It is interesting that the thing that fascinated them the most were the water faucets. It was because in the desert regions to which they were accustomed, water was always at a premium. It was difficult to find water, but these faucets enabled them to just turn the knob, and all the water they wanted was there. Now, Lawrence packed them up to go after the stay at that hotel and noticed that these men had unscrewed the faucets from off the sinks and had put those faucets in their bags. The reason those men stole those pieces of hardware was because each of them thought that if someone had the faucet, he had the water. No one realized that unless the faucet is connected to the plumbing, and he can turn the faucet off and on 1,000 times and nothing is going to happen. The Christian is just a spiritual faucet. That is all we are. But Jesus Christ is the spiritual plumbing. He is the source of all we have. He is the source of all that we are to do. And in this case, that means practicing righteousness. I'm going to discuss righteousness in more detail as we move through this book, but let me just mention that there are 2 categories of acceptable righteousness. The first is positional righteousness. Remember last time we mentioned a spiritual transaction called justification. Justification happens at someone's salvation. And through justification, that spiritual transaction, Christ's perfect righteousness is imputed to us, meaning Christ's righteousness is added to our spiritual account. And that righteousness is considered positional righteousness. And that means from that moment on, from salvation on, we have Christ's righteousness. And that means we are acceptable to God because God cannot reject his own righteousness. Second, though, there is practical righteousness. Practical righteousness, a Christian manifests through his attitude and actions in a progressive experiential sense after salvation. This is part of the sanctification process we mentioned last time. Practical righteousness is a Christian doing the right things at the right time, from the right motivation, and doing that on a consistent basis. Remember, though, the source of this practical righteousness is Jesus Christ. He is the plumbing and we are just the faucet. The question is, and why should we practice righteousness? Read the second part of this verse. Being filled with the fruits of righteousness, that is practical righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. Notice, to the glory and praise of God. Understand that we don't do the right things. We don't practice righteousness just so we can have a holier-than-thou attitude, so we can sit in church and turn our halo up on bright, and then walk around with our noses so stuck up in the air that if it rained, we'd probably drown. It doesn't mean do right so that we can feel we are in some sense better than someone else. But the point is, we are to do the right things. We are to practice righteousness to the glory and praise of God who has made it all possible. I can remember some time ago speaking at a high school summer camp. I would speak twice a day, and it was kind of a fun experience. And after a service, a teenager approached me in panic and said, "This isn't fair. It's just not fair. You're a pastor, and you're telling us to do the right things. You're telling us to be good, but you're a pastor. You're paid to be good, and you're expecting us to be good for nothing." I thought that was kind of humorous. And I said, "No, I'm not telling you to be good for nothing. I'm telling you to be good for someone, and that someone is Jesus. I'm not paid to be good. I am committed to doing the right things because as a Christian, I am committed to Jesus Christ." And I conclude with this. Osceola McCarty, became something of an American legend in 1995. Until that time, she had lived an obscure life in the Deep South. She dropped out of school in the 6th grade in order to take care of an ailing relative and to help her mother do laundry. But soon after, she began to also do laundry for the business people in the community of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. So she's from the Deep South. She did laundry for 50 cents a load, and that amounted to about 1 week of laundry per family. That's not a lot of money, but Osceola was thrifty and content. After paying bills each month and giving something to the church, she was a professing Christian, she deposited what was left in a savings account at the bank. It is said year after year, Osceola lived a quiet life of integrity. She cared for her grandmother, cared for her aunt and her mother. She traveled outside of Mississippi only one time. She never had a formal education past the 6th grade. She read her Bible every day, and she knelt every night to pray. And she was faithful to attend the Friendship Baptist Church. But besides that, she mostly worked and saved what she made. But then when she was 86 years old, the banker asked to see her. He sat her down to talk to her about what she wanted to do with all the money in her savings account when she died. Now remember, she was unmarried. She had no descendants, no children. To her astonishment, she discovered at that meeting that she had accumulated more than $250,000 in the bank. Osceola had lived a simple life in the past, and she wasn't about to change. She decided to donate some of that money to help out other African Americans receive what she had to do without an education. So in the summer of 1995, Osceola quietly gave $150,000 of that amount to a scholarship fund at the University of Southern Mississippi, and she specifically asked that not a single brick be named in her honor. But as fate would have it, word of that gift became known, and Osceola's name soon had greater prominence than if the university had named each building on campus after her. She was invited to appear on a number of television programs, interviews on Good Morning America and each of the major network news programs. She received numerous honors, including a trip to the White House to receive the Presidential Citizenship Award, and then a stop at Harvard University to accept an honorary doctorate of humane letters. Her story was featured on the front page of New York Times in magazines ranging from Ebony to People to Guidepost and Glamour. That's an unusual example, but that's an example of a simple person, one without wax, one that was authentic and sincere and real, that was faithful to practice righteousness And that's what Paul prayed that these Christians at Philippi would do. And that's exactly what he would want us to do also. Let's stand to our feet, would we? Everyone standing. I hope that you're committed to praying. But these are 4 things we should pray for the people that we pray about. And I hope you don't forget these. Let me just mention this. If you miss a Sunday, because these are a succession of sermons. If you miss a Sunday, you can always go to our website, which is mvbchurch.net, I think. And the media there, all the sermons are there. And you can just follow them and you can watch them. So if you ever miss, you can make it up and then you'll be better prepared to listen to the next one. I'm so glad you came. I hope you have a wonderful week. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Continue to pray for the sale of our building. We have 2 interested parties, but nothing has been solidified. We don't know. We're asking God for a miracle, so please continue to pray. And thank you for your faithfulness and your participation. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for your goodness. You've blessed all of us, no question or doubt about it. And today, I hope we've learned how to pray for others. And the things we're praying for others, we ought to pray for ourselves. We want to be these things. So God, help us to be all that you created us to be. We want, when we see you, we want to be able to bring a smile to your face. And I hope and pray that we would. So bless us as we go. Please protect our congregation. Keep us safe. Keep us healthy. And bring us back next Sunday to worship you again. And I thank you and praise you in the special and mighty name of your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. God bless you. Have a great week.